Dawn broke over the sweeping plains of Redemption Ridge, casting the quiet town in golden hues that felt far too gentle for the fierce struggles playing out beneath the surface. Reverend Edmund Thornton stood on the church's front steps, his eyes fixed on the scene before him. His daughter, Sarah, was standing in the middle of it, wrapped tightly in nothing but a blanket, her eyes locked with Cade Morrison's. The giant cowboy's hand gripped hers possessively, and his presence loomed like a storm on the horizon. Behind Cade, a dozen armed men shifted, ready to draw their guns at the slightest provocation. The tension between them was thick, but it was Sarah who stood unwavering, like a defiant beacon in the chaos, her voice steady as she spoke. "I am not going back, Father." Her words cut through the air like a sharp blade, more final than anything the Reverend could have imagined. He had prepared for this moment, bracing himself for the inevitable clash between his daughter's desires and his own responsibilities, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of Sarah, so determined, so utterly out of reach, standing between him and Cade, as if the entire world had shifted around her. The preacher's heart ached as his fingers gripped the wooden railing, the weight of the past few days settling upon him like an unbearable burden. Sarah had come to Redemption Ridge believing in the righteousness of their mission. She had left behind the cobbled streets of Boston, exchanging its familiar gas lamps for the sprawling prairie and the vast sky. The letters from her father had spoken of hope and opportunity, of a new life in the frontier, where faith could thrive amidst a community in need. But the reality she had arrived to was something entirely different. The first time Sarah had caught sight of Cade Morrison had been from the coach window. He stood in the middle of the road, blocking their path, a towering figure dressed in dark clothes and a black hat pulled low over his storm-gray eyes. His voice, when it rumbled from beneath the brim of his hat, had sent a chill down her spine. Cade had known who she was before she even arrived, the preacher's daughter from Boston. The implications of his words had barely settled in her mind before he stepped aside, letting the coach pass with a simple, knowing smile. That smile. It lingered in her thoughts as if branded there, a dangerous promise wrapped in the simplest of gestures. She had tried to shake it off, tell herself that Cade was no different than the rest of the hardened, weathered men she had seen in Redemption Ridge. But there was something about him that stood apart, something that gnawed at her, pulling at the very core of her convictions. The moment her coach had stopped in front of the church, and she saw her father standing there waiting, she had tried to push the thoughts of Cade Morrison out of her mind. But now, standing in the freezing morning air, surrounded by the stark landscape that seemed so different from the life she had known, Sarah realized the battle within her had only just begun. The sight of Cade, towering over her father, his rough hands gripping hers with a possessive force that left her breathless, sent a shockwave through her. She had been so sure of her purpose when she stepped off that coach in Redemption Ridge, but now doubt clouded her mind. Cade's presence, his words, the way his gaze had swept over her as if seeing beyond the layers of propriety she had clung to all her life, unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Was this what the frontier did to women? Was this what she had expected when she answered her father's call? "Welcome to Redemption Ridge, Miss Thornton." Cade's voice echoed in her thoughts, thick with that southern drawl of his. It was not a greeting. It was a challenge. She had heard the rumors of Cade Morrison, the ruthless cattle baron who controlled the land and the water rights, the man who had a common reputation that made even the strongest men in town quiver. But standing in front of him now, her stomach twisted in knots. There was more to Cade than just power and fear. There was something wild and untamed in him, something that made her feel small despite the height difference. And as much as she wanted to turn away, to reject him outright, something inside her couldn't. The encounter in the street had left a mark on her. When she had made her way to the church, her father's arms around her had been a comfort, a shield she thought would protect her from the danger that lurked just outside the town's borders. But she had underestimated the hold Cade Morrison had on the people of this place. She had underestimated him. Now, standing between her father and Cade, her voice strong and unwavering, Sarah realized she had already crossed a threshold. The moment she had agreed to come to Redemption Ridge, she had stepped into a world where nothing was certain, where every choice carried consequences she was not prepared for. Her father's eyes were filled with emotion as he tried to reach her, as he begged her to come home. His plea stung like a slap across her face. "Sarah, come home. This place is no place for you. Not with a man like that." But Sarah was done with hearing the words she had been raised on. She was done with living in the shadow of others' expectations. She wasn't sure what she was walking into, but she was certain of one thing. This was her life to choose. "Father," she said, the words coming out firmer than she had anticipated. "I love you, but I can't go back. Not like this. I have to stay. I have to find my own way." Her father recoiled at her words as if she had struck him with a whip. But Sarah's heart was already racing, already caught in a whirlwind of emotions that pulled her further from everything she had known. Cade's presence loomed behind her, a force of nature that she could no longer ignore. She had not realized how tightly she had been holding on to the past until that moment when she finally let go. Her father stood in shock. His shoulders slumped, the weight of defeat heavy in his posture. "You'll regret this, Sarah," he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "The world out here, it's not what you think it is." Sarah turned away from him, her back to Cade, her heart aching for the man who had raised her. But she could not stop herself. She could not go back to Boston. She could not go back to the safety of the life that had been planned for her. "I don't regret this," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to herself, to her father, or to the man standing behind her. The air around her seemed to hum, filled with something unspoken. "You're not going back either, Miss Thornton," Cade said, his voice so close now that Sarah could feel the vibrations of it beneath her skin. "You're with me now, whether you like it or not." It was a simple statement, but it was loaded with 1,000 implications. His words were not a threat, not exactly, but there was a certainty in them that unnerved her. As if he had already decided her fate. Sarah didn't look back at him. Instead, she fixed her gaze on the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to dip below the mountains, casting long shadows across the ground. There was no going back, no turning around. And as the wind picked up, swirling dust across the plains, Sarah realized that there would be no more pretending. The life she had imagined for herself had crumbled away in that moment, and the road ahead, unmarked, uncertain, was one she would have to walk alone, even if Cade Morrison was standing in the same path. The days following Sarah's decision were marked by an uneasy tension that permeated everything. Redemption Ridge had a pulse, a rhythm that Sarah had yet to understand. It was a rhythm that seemed to follow the movements of Cade Morrison, as though his very presence commanded the air around her. The town was small and crude, yet there was an undeniable power in its simplicity, a stark contrast to the sophistication of Boston. Sarah spent her days helping her father with the ministry. There was always work to be done, people to visit, sermons to prepare. But her mind was never far from the events that had unfolded. Cade's words haunted her, the way he had spoken to her, with such certainty, as if there was no room for hesitation. The way he had made her feel seen, something that she had never experienced in Boston, where she had always been carefully shielded, wrapped in propriety and the expectations of others. The preacher's daughter from Boston, the Boston girl, they whispered behind her back, wasn't quite what they expected. Sarah could hear the undertones in their voices, the curiosity mixed with judgment, the way the town had begun to look at her differently. She had become the subject of their attention, and it was Cade's. Eyes that she could not escape. Cade didn't approach her directly again, not in public. He was always somewhere on the edges of her life, just out of sight, but always watching. When she walked to the church in the morning, she could feel his presence like a shadow trailing behind her. When she visited the town's few families who attended her father's services, she would catch glimpses of him, his pale gray eyes fixed on her from across the dusty streets. He never spoke to her, never made a move, but his gaze was always there, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Sarah tried to avoid him. She told herself she could focus on her work, on the reason she had come to Redemption Ridge in the first place, to help her father build a ministry, to bring light to a town that desperately needed it. But each time she found herself alone, she thought of Cade, of the way he had spoken to her, the way he had looked at her with that predatory intensity. It wasn't just the way he looked at. It was the way he had made her feel. He had made her question everything, every principle she had held dear. In Cade Morrison's presence, she felt alive in a way she had never felt before. The heat that rushed through her veins when their eyes met, the way her heart raced at the sound of his deep voice, the way her body responded to his touch, even when it was just a brush of his fingers. It terrified her. She had grown up in a world where desire was something to be feared, something that needed to be suppressed. Women like her were taught to hide their feelings, to control their bodies, to maintain the decorum expected of them. But here, in Redemption Ridge, with Cade watching her from the edges of her life, all of those lessons seemed meaningless. She had been taught that love was something pure, something sacred, but now, with Cade's presence seeping into her every thought, she wondered if it was just a facade, a lie meant to keep women like her from the truth of their past desires. The truth, Sarah realized, was that Cade had unlocked something inside her, something she didn't understand but could no longer deny. She couldn't stop thinking about him, And when their paths crossed, as they inevitably did, it was as if the air between them crackled with the electricity of something unfinished. One such day, Sarah was walking back from Alma Pritchard's store, carrying a bundle of goods she had purchased for her father. The sun was high, beating down on the dirt streets of Redemption Ridge, and she was doing her best to ignore the heat that seemed to hang in the air. As she turned the corner, she came face to face with Cade. He was leaning against the side of the saloon, one boot propped up on the wall, his arms folded over his chest. His shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing the strength of his forearms, and his eyes, those stormy gray eyes, were fixed on her, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his lips. "Well, Miss Thornton," he said, his voice low and rough, as if every word was wrapped in a secret only the two of them shared. "Fancy seeing you out here. I was starting to think you were avoiding me." "I'm not avoiding anyone," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady, trying to maintain the calm she had been taught to uphold. But her heart was pounding in her chest, and her hands, clutching the bundle of goods, were trembling slightly. "I wouldn't mind a little company on this fine day," Cade continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "Maybe a walk with a lady from Boston? Teach me a little about your world." "I'm afraid you won't find much of it here," Sarah said, her voice sharp, though the effect of her words was lost in the way Cade's eyes glittered in the sunlight. Cade pushed off the wall, taking a step toward her. "Perhaps not, but I think you and I could find common ground. After all, we both know what it's like to want something." The weight of his words settled over her like a storm cloud, dark and heavy. She didn't know how to respond. She couldn't. The truth was that she did want something she shouldn't want, something she had no right to feel. But the words stuck in her throat, and she could only watch as Cade's eyes seemed to devour her, reading her every thought. "I'm just trying to keep my head down, Mr. Morrison," Sarah said, her voice quieter now, laced with the tension she could no longer ignore. "Trying to make a life here, the same as everyone else." "A life here?" Cade raised an eyebrow. "A life among these people? You think that's what you came for? To save a town that doesn't want saving? You think that's what your father sent you here for? To put the fear of God in men who don't know him?" Sarah opened her mouth to reply, but the words died before they reached her lips. Because deep down, she knew Cade was right. Redemption Ridge was a town built on fear and desperation. It was a town that had long since given up on the ideals Sarah had brought with her, and now, standing before Cade, she realized that maybe she had been fooling herself all along. "I came here to help my father," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "To do what's right." "And what's right, Miss Thornton?" Cade's voice was quiet now, almost tender, as though he was coaxing her into something she hadn't yet recognized. "What's right about letting the people here starve, while the preacher stands up there every Sunday and talks about faith? You think faith is going to fix this? Faith doesn't put food on the table, or water in the well." "I don't believe that," Sarah said, the conviction returning to her voice, though she wasn't sure if she believed it anymore. "I believe in what my father's doing. I believe in the church. That's why I'm here." Cade stepped closer, his presence overwhelming her as it always did. "And what if I told you that you could have more than faith here? More than prayers and sermons and empty promises? What if I told you that you could have power, Sarah? Power to make things happen? To change the world?" Sarah recoiled, instinctively taking a step back. "I don't want power. I don't want anything from you." But Cade's eyes glinted with something darker now, something Sarah couldn't put her finger on. "Then why are you here? Why did you come to this God-forsaken town? To play at being a preacher's daughter? To save a town that doesn't want saving? Or maybe you came here for something else." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Maybe you came here for me." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say, what to do. The world felt like it was collapsing around her, spinning out of control. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Stay away from him, Sarah. He's dangerous. He'll use you, and when he's done with you'll be broken." But what if he was right? What if Cade wasn't the villain she had imagined, but something entirely different? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Before she could respond, Cade straightened up and backed away, his hands raised in mock surrender. "I'll leave you to it, Miss Thornton. But remember, I'll be here whenever you change your mind." The weeks that followed were marked by an unsettling stillness, a kind of quiet before the inevitable storm. Sarah threw herself into the work at the church, just as her father did, and yet her thoughts kept drifting back to Cade. It was an inescapable pull, like the tides that rise and fall with the moon, shifting her emotions in ways that confused and frightened her. He was always there, just out of sight, but never far from her mind. And every time their paths crossed, there was that same unbearable tension between them, as if the air itself crackled with unspoken words. It was in the evenings when Sarah sat alone in her room that the thoughts would flood her mind, overwhelming her like a floodgate suddenly opened. She would replay his words in her head, the way he had looked at her, the challenge in his voice. What did he want from her? What was this game he was playing? And why did it make her feel things she had no right to feel? Was it desire? Or was it something darker, something she couldn't name? The town itself seemed to be holding its breath, caught in the tension between Cade's growing power and her father's unyielding faith. The people of Redemption Ridge were simple folk, but they were not blind. They knew what was at stake. They saw the power that Cade had over the land, over the water, and they saw the struggle between him and her father. Whispers followed Sarah wherever she went. There were those who pitied her, who saw her as a pawn in a game that was far too dangerous for someone like her. Others saw her as a curiosity, the preacher's daughter, a plotteray, beacon of purity and righteousness in a town that was anything but pure. Sarah tried to ignore the whispers, to keep her focus on her work, but it became impossible to shut out the world around her. She had always thought of herself as strong, a woman who could stand firm in her beliefs no matter the cost. But now, she wasn't so sure. Cade had cracked the carefully constructed armor she had built around herself. He had seen through her, read her like a book, and now she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew. The more she tried to distance herself from him, the more she found herself drawn to him. It was as though the very act of avoiding him had intensified his presence in her life, and so she came to a decision. She couldn't keep running from this, from him, any longer. The only way to regain control was to face it head on. It was on one of those long, hot afternoons when she saw him again. Cade was standing near the saloon, his back against the weathered wood of the building, watching her as she walked down the street. His presence seemed to loom over her like a storm cloud, dark and foreboding. She could feel his eyes on her, pulling at her in ways she couldn't explain. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she stood frozen in place. His gaze never left her, a silent challenge in his eyes, as though he were daring her to approach him, to acknowledge what had been left unsaid between them. And then, as if sensing her hesitation, he pushed off from the wall and took a few steps toward her. "Miss Thornton," he said, his voice smooth and deep, carrying across the dusty street to her. "You look like you've got something on your mind." Sarah swallowed hard, her nerves electrified by his proximity. "I don't have anything to say to you, Cade." He smiled, that same predatory grin that always made her skin prickle with awareness. "I think you do. You've been avoiding me, and that's not like you." "I'm not avoiding you," Sarah said, her voice more forceful than she intended. "I've just been busy." Cade didn't seem convinced. He took another step forward, closing the distance between them, until they were standing just inches apart. Sarah could feel the heat of his body, the powerful presence that seemed to fill the air around her. "You know," Cade murmured, "you don't have to be so strong all the time. It's okay to let go, to admit that you want something more." Sarah's breath hitched. "I don't want anything from you." His eyes gleamed with something dangerous, something that made Sarah's pulse race despite herself. "But you do, Sarah. You just don't want to admit it." "You're scared of what that means. But I'm not. I know exactly what I want, and I think, deep down, you do too." She tried to step back, but Cade was too close. He reached out, his hand brushing against her arm as if by accident, but the touch was anything but accidental. It was electric, sending a jolt through her that she couldn't ignore. "You don't know me," Sarah said, her voice trembling, betraying her. "You don't know what I want?" "Oh, I know exactly what you want," Cade replied, his voice low and intense. "You want to be free. You want to feel something real, something that makes you forget about the rules, the expectations, all the things you've been taught to fear." Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but her body seemed to act on its own. Her breath quickened, and she couldn't pull away from him. His presence was like a magnet, drawing her in despite her best efforts to resist. "You think I'm just some kind of game, don't you?" she said, trying to regain some semblance of control. "That you can manipulate me into your world, and I'll just fall in line like all the other women you've had." Cade shook his head, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're not like the other women, Sarah. That's what makes you different. And that's why I want you. I can see the fire in you, the strength that you've tried so hard to hide. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension, and for a moment, it felt like the entire town had faded away. It was just Sarah and Cade standing in the heart of Redemption Ridge, locked in a battle of wills that neither of them could escape. "I'm not like you," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't be." "You don't have to be like me," Cade said, his voice softer now, almost coaxing. "You just have to be yourself. And you're stronger than you think, Sarah. You can choose to fight against this, or you can choose to let go and see where it takes you." His words lingered in the air, heavy with implication. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, her mind racing to make sense of everything. Was it possible? Could she really let go of everything she had been taught, everything she had believed in, just to feel something with Cade? Before she could respond, there was a sound. In the distance, a horse's hooves approaching. Cade straightened up, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked over her shoulder. "I'll let you think about it," he said, his voice taking on a note of finality. "But just know, Sarah, I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away, his long strides eating up the distance between them. Sarah stood there, her thoughts a tangled mess, unable to process everything that had just happened. As she watched Cade disappear into the distance, she knew that things were changing. She could feel the pull of him, like a tide that could not be resisted. And for the first time in her life, Sarah wasn't sure if she wanted to fight it.